Welcome, fellow wanderers. It's been a few months since Street Fighter 6 released, a few collabs have come and gone. We're halfway through the first season pass, there's been a few majors, online tournaments seem to be underway soon. We've had enough time to soak the game in, enough time, I think, to say this. Street Fighter 6's modern controls are indeed bad. And no, I'm not the latest who's fundamentally opposed to auto combo or simple input mechanics, to use some blanket terms here. Frankly, I don't think I would have played this game at all if not for some inclusion of this sort of thing. I think when we talk about automation mechanics in fighting games, we tend to talk about them in broad strokes about our general ideologies. You know, are you opposed to the existence of this sort of thing, or are you in favor of it? However, I think there's room for a bit of a more nuanced conversation here. The automation mechanics you see in Dragon Ball, the automation you see in Street Fighter 6 right now, the automation you see in Cross Tag, these are completely different systems, and I think grouping them all up under one blanket term like auto combo is a little reductive. Street Fighter 6's implementation of these mechanics has unique issues, which work very differently from what you'd experience over in a game like Grand Blue or something. Now, the first and most obvious point of contention here is going to be the simple input instant specials, right? Usually when you want to perform, say, a Dragon Punch, you need to complete a precise input, which takes a moment to perform. Even if you've been playing Ken for decades, which maybe you have if you're watching this video, performing a Dragon Punch is not as simple as just pressing a button. And if you're a human being, error is possible. The precognition required to get the attack out in time to land it when you need it to land, and the technical execution involved, in part offset the strength of this fast and powerful technique. Unless you're playing Street Fighter 6 on modern controls, in which case you just press a button and it sort of just happens. Well, now all of a sudden we're dealing with something completely different, stripped entirely of its primary drawbacks. Now, I'm sure some would say, that's why there's a 20% damage reduction on your specials and supers. That's missing the point. The Dragon Punch is not powerful because of its damage. It is powerful because it's a giant fucking invincible hitbox with hella active frames which forces a hard knockdown. The attack could do 0 damage, and it would still be pretty damn useful. Taking a bit of damage off the top in no way balances this discrepancy. And the Dragon Punch is just one example in a game where about a quarter of the roster has access to a command grab, by the way. Choosing modern controls gives players access to powerful tools which players on Classic simply do not have. For one, I don't think this is really fair. Further, I don't think that splitting up the player base between completely different versions of the gameplay is really healthy for a 1v1 competitive video game. So at this point, you might be thinking that my opinion is modern controls are overtuned or too strong, and in some ways, yes, I think that's a problem right now. But the modern control scheme does not begin and end with the simple specials. There are more issues with modern controls which make them extremely undertuned, and at times make me wonder why the mechanic is even in the fucking game in the first place. Obviously, you lose half of your normals while on modern controls. I'll get back to this, but I do think this is a somewhat workable compromise to have a 6-button fighter work with this kind of control scheme. If you've ever played these sort of games, you are aware that you are never actually going to use all of your normals, and most modern control characters keep their best and most important normal tools. What I fail to understand is why this game strips out varying amounts of your special tools while on modern controls. It's simple to give the character different versions of their normals with this sort of control scheme. Grand Blue did it years ago, and Street Fighter 6 does it already with the simple inputs for EX versions of the specials. It baffles me that the player cannot further decide between light, mediums, and heavies. Sure, you could just perform these manually with the classic controls, but at that point, again, why are the modern controls in the game? Now, this is exacerbated by how unevenly these controls are applied. Simply put, some characters are made more synergistic with this control setup than others. My favorite character is Luke because he retains nearly all of his vital tools on modern, and his modern control setup feels very synergistic with his kit. He's got a helpful target combo which you can cancel into just about anything, most of his best normals, several powerful panic buttons thanks to his simple inputs and supers, and only a couple of his key special tools require manual input. Again, I think that requiring manual input at all kind of defeats the purpose of this sort of thing, but modern Luke has it great as far as this game goes. Compare that to a character like JP who is stripped as hell on modern while getting 0 tools from the modern inputs, or charge characters like Guile. What is the point of even including this modern setup in its current form on characters like Guile? You still need to do the charge. The difficulty of charge characters is learning the charge timing. You still need to learn that on modern. Choosing modern Guile does not simplify his game plan or controls or help you in any way, while simultaneously stripping his tools. Doesn't seem like good game design to me that for a character like Luke, choosing Modern is a reasonable choice for a serious gameplay, while for a character like Guile, you are actively choosing to make yourself weaker. Now, some might say that the point is to onboard you with Modern controls as a sort of training wheel to get you in the door and eventually learning Classic. And no, at least as far as Capcom seems to state, that would be what dynamic controls are in the game for. Yeah, remember those? Modern controls are presented as an alternative and equal control scheme to stand side by side with the usual Classic control setup. And to wrap things together a bit here, I think Capcom fails at this. Modern controls give you a completely different gameplay experience with entirely different tools, in which your mileage may vary wildly on usability depending on which character you choose. You have access to a whole slew of powerful tools which are kept away from classic players, while simultaneously having a gimped overall kit. Does this sound like healthy gameplay to you? Throw people on worse characters who have access to exclusive selections of one-trick gimmicks? And the thing is, it really does not have to be this way. Some may criticize how Dragon Ball's auto combos are effectively required to be used by all players, or how they disproportionately imbalance the game at low-level play, but ultimately they accomplish the same effect of getting people in the door and playing without the caveat of fragmenting the player base. Everyone is still playing the same versions of the same characters on the same game, which I can't say about Street Fighter 6 right now. Now finally, I've referenced it a couple of times now, let's look at Granblue a little bit, which I think represents the fundamental disconnect with Street Fighter 6's implementation of a simple mode. The primary reason for the imbalance of these mechanics in Street Fighter 6 is because the game and its characters are designed with classic controls in mind, and the simple input stuff is an artificial appendage grafted onto the game's body after the fact. Converting a 6-button fighter into a 3-button fighter with extra assist buttons is never going to work perfectly smoothly. Granblue's simple inputs work because the game is designed with them in mind, which also provides the option for classic inputs if you so desire. This game also addresses the problem of the uneven input requirements by giving the simple inputs worse frame data, thus mitigating their advantage. Now, the new incoming sequel seems to be throwing out that frame data disadvantage entirely, but, shit, we don't need to talk about that today. Ultimately, I don't think there's any way for Street Fighter 6 to release a perfectly seamless and equal alternate control setup, unless the foundations are designed with this kind of control setup in mind. The game would probably have some issues if Capcom threw in a Wii Remote Motion Control mode or a DDR mode, and while that might sound kind of funny, it would probably work about as well as the modern control setup currently does. In my opinion, there are two ways Capcom could go about improving this. The obvious way, the hard way, would be to create a game which actually works with this mode of input in mind. See Granblue or maybe Crosstag. However, redesigning this entire game around a feature that only a portion of the game's active and regular player base actually makes use of is probably not realistic, at least not until Street Fighter 7 or something. Alternatively, Capcom could still improve upon the current system without fundamentally changing it. Let players choose between the light, medium, or heavy versions of the modern specials, adjust the frame data for the modern specials and supers, and give players the full special list on modern. I do think the loss of normals is generally a fair concession, more reasonable than fundamentally altering the game to fully suit this control setup. To bring this all back together a bit, my point is that I think the current system hurts everyone. If you don't use modern, you get to deal with random hyper-powerful offensive and defensive options which you simply do not have an equal response to. If you do use it, you get more janky and limited options for characters. Nobody really wins with the current implementation of this system, and barring the option of scrapping it altogether, I think an overhaul would be healthy for the future of Street Fighter 6 long term. Hello, thank you for watching the video, and if you watched my previous video, thank you for sticking around with me here. I'm not too amazing at Street Fighter 6, but I'd like to think your boy is the hottest modern Platinum Luke this side of the Rockies. I'm enjoying the game a lot, and I'd like to see some of these kinks ironed out a bit as it sticks around. It took 7 years, but we're finally where we should have been back in 2016, right? Anyway, we'll be back for Final Fantasy II soon, but I wanted to try and diversify my content a little bit before I just pigeonhole myself into Square Enix and Nintendo, which is, I don't know, the stuff I kind of want to talk about the most, honestly. Anyway, thank you for watching. We'll be back next time.